This is Trent Lindsey, and you're listening to the Plant-Based Diet Benefits Podcast. In this episode, I am extremely excited to kick off the Plant-Based Diet Benefits Podcast and chat with you guys about this diet that has changed my life for the better. And chances are, if you're listening to the podcast today, you've been intrigued by the plant-based diet as well and are interested in learning more about the benefits that can help for you or those that you care about most. This topic is incredibly important for me as well because I don't like where our society is headed, and I hope that you join us on this journey to better health, because our mission here at Plant-Based Diet Benefits Podcast is to improve our world one healthy person at a time. Let's start the show. Hey friends, it's Trent here, and I'm super excited to be kicking off episode 1 of the Plant-Based Diet Benefits Podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to take you down a little journey today over the past few decades of where our society has come from and where it's headed from an obesity perspective, because I think it's critical to understanding why this podcast exists. So let's get started. I was born back in 1984, so I'll leave it up to you guys to do the math and figure out how old I am. But back then, in my home state of Arizona, I was born into a world where there was less than 10% obesity. So less than 1 out of every 10 people that I would come across at the grocery store or at a baseball field or at school, my teachers, those people that I looked up to, less than 10% of them were obese. It was not that common back then. But unfortunately, over time, things have changed. And as a society, we have become more and more overweight and more obese. If you fast forward only a few years, in 1990, there was now between 10 and 14% of the population in Arizona considered obese. You go forward another 10 years, and that number jumps to 15 to 19% of the population as obese. So at that point, I was 16 years old, and potentially double the people were obese in my state of Arizona. Go through a few more years, and in 2004, we made the leap over 20%, where 20 to 24% of the adults in the state of Arizona were obese. Fast forward another couple of years, and in 2009, we made another leap, so to speak. And over 25% of the population was obese in the state of Arizona. Now, this hits home for me because these stats are for Arizona. But the same thing could be said for many of the states across the country. There's not a single state that hasn't had this same positive correlation with time and the percentage of obesity in their state. Some of the states that have been hit the hardest are those in the South. Only a couple of states have kind of lagged behind in terms of obesity. One being Colorado, for example, where right now they're sitting at around 15 to 19% obesity. And I find it disturbing that it's accepted now, that this is just part of our society. It doesn't take long for it to become normal to be the weight that we are now. But the thing is, I don't want my kids who are young now to be born into a world where there's 25+% of the adults that they look up to as obese. I mean, if this trend continues, then by the time that they're graduating high school, is it going to be 30%, 40%, 50% of the population is obese? This should be disturbing for all of us. And of course, obesity is a leading cause of so many diseases. Specifically, some that come to mind are things like type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. These things are linked, very positively correlated with being overweight or obese. And they are all major risk factors for heart disease, which is the biggest killer in the United States today, as well as many other modernized nations out there. And you see it all over the news. There's all these different diets available to people that promise short-term results. But that's all that really people get. They go on a diet, they lose some weight, and then they kind of return back to their old habits. They gain the weight back, and the cycle repeats itself. And I get it, there's a lot of convenience in the world that we live today. There's fast food restaurants everywhere. And people just don't cook at home as much as they used to. That's part of the reason why we've got to where we are today. One of the things that I cherish is having family meals at home with home-cooked food and spending that time with the family. But of course, there's always busy nights, right? We have 3 kids, my wife and I, with a 4th on the way. So we're busy. We have baseball, soccer, gymnastics, things that make our evenings busier than they used to be. And sometimes convenience does get in the way. But it's a matter of finding healthy options or alternatives to fuel our bodies that won't lead to long-term sickness, but instead long-term health. There's a great book out there called The Pleasure Trap that discusses how our brains are kind of wired and how we go about our lives trying to minimize pain and maximize pleasure with the least effort possible. And it makes a lot of sense to me that things like fast food restaurants are such an easy go-to for people because it takes very minimal effort. We receive a lot of pleasure from the food because of the taste, a lot of times due to the salt and the fat content of those foods. And it causes the least pain because I don't know about you guys, especially if you have young kids, sometimes it can be tough when you put food on the table and you receive those groans or the, "Oh no, not this dinner again," type of comments. They're hurtful sometimes. So sometimes it's just easier, right, to get the kids' meal at a fast food restaurant. In the show notes for this episode, I'm going to provide a link to that book, The Pleasure Trap. I think it's a must-read for anybody who's transitioning into a plant-based diet or anybody who maybe isn't as open and wants to continue with whatever diet they're on. The Pleasure Trap is eye-opening, and it is such a good book to understand why we make the choices that we do. And let's face it, we all know that we should be eating a lot more fresh fruits and vegetables. But whether or not we make these choices is another story. That's because it's easy to know what to do, but it's not so easy to do what you know. And this is where I come in. I'm hoping to help you along your journey to a plant-based diet. Whether you've already started on a plant-based diet and you're just trying to learn more, or maybe you're on the standard American diet now, or a keto diet, or any other diet that's out there. But you're interested in learning more about this plant-based diet you've been hearing so much about. And I'm here to educate you on various topics of a plant-based diet that I think are just elemental to understanding how our bodies work and how they want food. Things such as calorie density, which basically comes out to the number of calories per pound of food that you're eating. The lower calorie density foods are just great for you from a weight loss perspective and a matter of helping you feel full without being deprived of food. Then things like blood sugar regulation, which is, of course, critical for type 2 diabetes, but it's important for everybody to understand how your body works when it comes to blood sugar. Essential fats, which are just so important for us, where to get them on a plant-based diet. And of course, there's the topic of protein requirements, which is like the number one question that any individual who eats a plant-based diet gets is, where do you get your protein from? We're going to break that down for you, including other topics like digestion, cleansing and detoxification, and sources of minerals and vitamins on a plant-based diet. But we also look forward to bringing on other guests onto the show to discuss their real-life success stories on a plant-based diet. Where did they come from on their journey? What ultimately made them decide to transition to a plant-based diet? We also plan on talking about different approaches to a plant-based diet. There are so many out there that are, advertised by various plant-based doctors, people on YouTube, which of course, some are good, some are bad, but ultimately it's up to you who you choose to follow. And of course, there's many diseases that have been linked to a plant-based diet from a prevention and possibly even a reversal. It's amazing what a plant-based diet can do, and we're going to talk about all these different things on the podcast. But ultimately, what it comes down to, in terms of the benefits of a plant-based diet, is that the more fresh fruits and vegetables, grains, legumes that you eat, the less of the bad stuff you end up eating. And really, that's where the magic is. It's not always about what you're adding into your body, but what you're taking away. So things like processed foods, we want to try to eliminate those. Refined carbohydrates like sugar, excessive amounts of saturated fats, trans fats, cholesterol, excess sodium, preservatives, all these things that you may be including in your diet now will be minimized or eliminated altogether by eating more plants. In episode 2, you guys get to hear a little bit more about my story and my journey to a plant-based diet. I think it's a great opportunity for you guys to understand where I'm coming from as I sit here and chat with you guys. From there, I'm going to start off the next few episodes with guests who have been eating a plant-based diet for a considerable amount of time. One person in particular is Jake Mace, also known as the Vegan Athlete on YouTube. He is the reason why I started on a plant-based diet, and I am absolutely honored to have him be a guest on the show. So thank you all very much for joining me today. Kept this one nice and short for you, but I look forward to having you listen in on future episodes and assisting you on your path to better health. Be sure to subscribe to the show, share it with those that you care about most, and visit the show notes where you can download the transcript of the show, as well as a link to the book I referenced earlier, The Pleasure Trap. It's a fantastic book. Full disclosure, it is an affiliate link. If you do purchase through that link, then you are providing a very small amount of income to me, but at no additional cost of yours. But it does help support this show. So please go and click on that link if you're interested in purchasing The Pleasure Trap. It's a fantastic read, and I'd highly recommend it. And lastly, some additional resources for you if you'd like to learn more about plant-based diet benefits. Then feel free to check out our website at www.plantbaseddietbenefits.com. We have a Facebook page at Plant-Based Diet Benefits, or you can join our Facebook group, which is the Plant-Based Diet Benefits community. We'll provide all of the links on the show notes as well for our Facebook group. Thank you very much for your time today. I look forward to hearing from you guys and comments on my show notes or in my Facebook group. Look forward to interacting with you there. Until then, I'll see you next time. Take care.